Hi everyone, I'm Daniel, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about some investigators that need some help. And by help, I mean some additions to the card pool to make them a little bit more viable or just, better in the game. These are some investigators that people often rank towards the bottom of like tier lists that have to do with power. Now, I know that not every investigator is going to have the same power level, but these investigators tend to be a little bit dull or just maybe need some help with the card pool. So importantly, when I talk about what we're going to do for these investigators, no changes to the investigator card. We're not talking about taboos. We're not talking about parallels. We're not talking about anything like that. We just want to talk about what they can do in the game to add to the card pool to make them a little bit more fun to play. And they've done it before, right? With a big expanded card pool, some investigators have moved up the tier list quite a bit and have a lot more options. Rita Young is kind of one of these that people kind of were about when she came out in Circle Undone, but now she's a pretty good investigator. But more recently, if you are not a Skids truther, you should be. They have printed so many good cards for Skids O'Toole in the last 3 sets, I would say. So starting with Edge of the Earth, with Defensive Stance, Sweeping Kick, and Scarlet Keys for sure with Dirty Fighting, and now more recently with Wolf Mask. This guy's pretty good, right? Again, a lot of people have this bad memory of him from the core set where the Rogue card pool in general was bad, and the Guardian class that he gets 0 to 2 Guardian was not particularly helpful. So admittedly, he's not the strongest investigator now, but I've been playing him through Return to the Circle Undone solo, one investigator, and he has been holding his own, maybe even more than that. Again, I'm not going to spoil how the run is going. I mean, it's going well, but we've gotten most of the victory points, I would say, from the scenarios, and just kind of, I don't want to say cruised, but you can definitely do a lot with the Rogue card pool now with his ability, I would say, and his stat line. And the Guardian cards like Wolf Mask really, really help too. So what can we do for these 3 investigators? And that's just some ideas that I have. And maybe you have some ideas as well, or some other investigators that you might think need some help from the card pool. So let's go ahead and start with Jim Culver. You'll notice that most of these investigators are from the first few sets. We're just going to be talking about 3. Jim and the next investigator have the Dunwich Splash, so they can take cards from their main class, Mystic here, and 5 cards from anything. So to some extent, adding things to their card pool can come from any class, but I'll also be talking about just kind of Mystic in general. So Jim's whole thing is his stat line is kind of like Skids, it's just backwards. He's got 4 willpower, 3 of the kind of 2 do-something stats, intellect and combat, and then 2 agility. The problem is his ability has to do with passing skill tests. That's basically it. You treat the modifier on skull tokens as a 0. And you can make the Elder Signs skulls as well. And this is really hard to do anything with unless you have other cards in play. So he kind of plays a couple different ways. Usually you're just trying to fish for skull tokens in order to more likely pass tests. Most investigators can just pass tests though, so why would you really want to draw the skulls? Well, there are a few cards that care specifically about you drawing skull tokens. Mostly this is Song of the Dead, which is generally a bad card, and Sixth Sense is kind of another good card for him to try to make use of wanting to draw those skull tokens in the first place, especially the level 4 version. So I think there's needs to be more than this, right? More payoffs. There's a few other things. There's a few things like, let's see, what is it? The Jewel of Aureolus, right? This one is gives you resources or cards for drawing symbol tokens, and a lot of these cards now have been tabooed or otherwise augmented to be any symbol token, and this is good. But I found with most of Jim's payoffs, there's a big slot pressure, right? There's basically just a couple of these cards, and you kind of want them all in play at once, and that's really hard to pull off. So not only do I want more cards that are, maybe an upgrade to Song of the Dead, to really want you to draw skulls in particular, I think I want more things that allow you to take advantage of this or fish for these tokens that don't take up a slot. So generally you want to play Olive McBride, and she takes up a slot, an ally slot, really important slot, of course, to do other things. And then sometimes you want Nkosi Mbati because he allows you to, um, replace other symbol tokens for skulls, which is also really good. But now you're looking at some allies that cost XP and charisma, and then you have to think about what you're putting in your other slots. I really liked putting scavenging in his deck because that was slotless, right? Before the taboo, of course. Now it's still you can still do it because it costs you 2 XP, because it gave you a little bit of payoff for drawing basically a 0 token. Essentially, you're going to be succeeding a bunch of investigates with your Sixth Sense, but gave you some reason to actually want to pull things out of the discard as well, like pulling a grotesque statue out. So I think there's a lot of things that he wants to hold. He wants to hold ritual candles sometimes. He wants to hold his trumpet. You can play a cool build with the Winchester, 35 Winchester, I believe it is, which in its tabooed form allows you to do extra damage if you are pulling tokens with non-negative modifiers, like the skull would have. This is really good, but now you're taking up 2 hand slots. You can't hold the candles. You can't hold the grotesque statue. You can't hold the trumpet. You can do something like Astral Mirror here, perhaps, but then you're giving up Sixth Sense. There's just a lot of things that you kind of want in play before your card does anything. And I think that makes this pretty tough. Maybe more events, or skills that help Jim out would be a good addition. Lastly, what I would like to see is maybe more non-willpower support in the Mystic class. Again, you get those 5 off-class slots, so you can put in things like Beat Cop or Dr. Milan, but I really want to make use of that 3 combat especially. I noticed when I played the 35 Winchester in Gem, you kind of had a hard time passing tests if you didn't actually draw the skull, because there's of course other ways to get the 3 damage. The +2 on the Winchester is really good, but sometimes 5 doesn't quite cut it, especially if you're using Olive and having to reveal and resolve multiple tokens at once. So there's a few things you can do. I think the Cat Mask is a good addition. You can do the Living Ink for a little bit of this, but I'd like to see like even one ally that gives you plus combat in Mystic. There's nothing. There's very little support for anything but willpower in Mystic. I hope this changes soon. I think there is some support for that, I think, coming up. They've been teasing it with things like Cat Mask and Living Ink, but I'd like to see some more for Jim. All right, next up is, of course, Jenny Barnes. This is Jim's friend from the Dunwich Legacy, and she's got, again, the same 5 off-class cards, and she's got 3s across the board. Not dissimilar to Jim, where the 3s don't always cut it. Part of the reason why, I think, in this game is that it doesn't give you a strong inclination of like what thing you want to do. Which stat do you want to use to pass your tests? And for Jim, I guess it can be sort of anything. For Jenny, that's true too, and you kind of want to take advantage of passing any of those tests. Otherwise, why are you playing Jenny? But that's hard to do with the card pool because, again, you need things in play in order to pass things anyway. Her actual ability on the card does do something. It gives you 1 additional resource during upkeep, and that's good. You can get a lot of money quickly, but the card pool now, the rogue card pool especially, allows you to get a lot of resources. So her ability is not that strong anymore. Doesn't really make her stand out as much. It is easy, right? There's nothing you need to do to make it work. It just happens. And that's what I feel like Jenny is in general, right? She can do kind of anything without any restrictions on her, but that's maybe not that good anymore. Maybe we need a little bit more support for her in particular compared to other rogues. So often people look at Preston Fairmont, who is a really good investigator who cares about having a lot of money and can easily get money quicker than Jenny can. So where does that leave Jenny? Well, people are quick to forget that Preston has some limitations. He cannot use any illicit cards, and Jenny can. So of all of the rogues who can do some sort of big money build, yeah, there's Skids, there's parallel Skids. Tony can be pretty decent as well. But Jenny is kind of the only one that gets the whole card pool, gets the extra resources pretty easily, and can use any of her stats. So I think what would set her apart from, say, Preston is more of the illicit cards. especially ones that might use resources. It's interesting we don't have anything, I think, in the rogue card pool that allows you to use resources or cares about how many resources you have on, say, a weapon or other asset itself. We have things like Well Connected that lets you, get just generic skill boosts, and of course you can pay with any of the skill pumps, but nothing that's like, you get an extra damage if you have 10 or more resources. Something like that might be pretty cool for Jenny that would set her apart from other investigators, especially for Preston. Tony, Tony can do anything, so I'm not sure that how to keep him from getting too powerful as well. But that's kind of the idea with some of these discussions is how can we make sure that these investigators that feel like they've lost their niche can get a little better without making other investigators really good too. The ones that are already good, make them even better. So that's kind of where I see Jenny. She should be leaning more into the illicit things because Preston can't. It would also be nice, again, because Preston can't, to get some more other expensive off-class cards. So it's tough because why are you putting them in the off-class if no one in those classes can afford them? But I find that Jenny is really good with Dynamite Blast, right? You can pay for it pretty easily. It solves a lot of problems. It's a fun card anyway. But there aren't too many other off-class cards that she would really take advantage of. When I played Jenny on my channel, I played, I think Connect the Dots for resources actually was pretty easy for her to spend money on. But yeah, I think there'd be some other cool things. Maybe there already are some cool things I'm not thinking of in the level 0 off-class cards for her. Lastly, she's one of the few investigators in the rogue class that can use willpower. Sort of, right? 3 is not good, but there are a lot of ways to boost that up. I think she's really good with Dario. I mean, Safina also is good here, but there's a good number of 3 and 1/4 willpower investigators in Rogue that I think Jenny just gets better if there's more cards to let her use that. So that's just another little thought that might be fun for her and where Preston would be not that interested. All right, that's Jenny. I actually feel like Jenny's still okay. She doesn't need as much help because the rogue card pool in general is so good. However, the last one on our list is Calvin. I love playing Calvin. I think he's really engaging to play, and he can do a lot. The thing is, his ceiling is still pretty low. So his ability, he's got zeros across the board, so you need to do something about that. And it's to take damage and horror. So you get +1 willpower and intellect for each horror on you, +1 combat and agility for each damage on you. Only 6/6 for his health and sanity, so you cannot go above 5 for your stats unless you get the which one is it? It's the Pentacles one. Is it the Rod of Pentacles? I don't remember what the name of it is. That allows you to boost your health and sanity up, so you still could go to 6/6/6/6. But is that good, right? You're doing a lot of work just to pass tests, and most investigators can pass tests. So what's so good about Calvin? It's really that he can get big numbers across the board, right? If you're not taking advantage of all of your stats, then why are you playing Calvin? And that's sort of the same problem with the other 2 investigators here, that they tend to solve a lot of problems on the board, but can't specialize enough. And in Arkham Horror, the card game, you can do really, really well by specializing because you're leaning into some really powerful cards. And that's not necessarily going to win you games. Of course, if you're playing at lower player counts, you need to solve more than just the problem that your deck is designed to solve. And Calvin's really good at, going around and getting rid of treacheries that are stuck to locations where he can just, test at, 5 or 6 agility or willpower to get rid of things for people. So he's nice to play those kinds of roles, but towards the end of a campaign, you kind of want to do more. And you start looking around at the other investigators and you say, man, they could get a lot more done than Calvin ever could. Now, I do know that some people don't like Calvin because they feel like part of their deck is taken up by ways to not die. And it is true that you need something. I don't think it's as much as it used to be. I've recently played Calvin in a standalone, and honestly, just having a Peter Sylvester and a Spirit of Humanity was enough. But I'm really surprised that they have not printed very many cards for this guy in recent expansions because he needs the most help, I think, of any of the three that I've talked about. There's not much that is allowing him to just voluntarily take damage or horror, which is something he really wants to do, or take advantage of that itself. So it's a little disappointing. So here are some things that I think that they need to do. One is survivors don't have access to cards that give them extra actions, and not much in action compression either. Their whole shtick is that they can just pass tests and survive the mythos. Again, good, but not that good because other classes need to do that too. So what do they do better than anyone else? It's just sort of that contingency plan that they won't fail tests, or even if they will, they can take advantage of that. But again, with a lot of XP in your deck towards the end of a campaign, you can do way more than that in other investigators. So in order for him to take advantage of having these bonkers stats, he needs to be able to take a lot of tests a turn, and he can't. Mostly because he gets those 3 actions. Sometimes one of those actions is to move. One of those actions might be to play a card. And then you sort of get down to taking 1, maybe 2 tests a turn, and you're just as good as anyone else who can commit cards or use their once per round ability to pass a test. So I liken him to Amanda. Amanda Sharp is a really, really strong investigator because she, like Calvin, she's got low stats and she can basically make one or many of them larger during one turn, but she can make lots of tests because of the Seeker card pool. Seeker card pool can let her use Shortcut, Pathfinder to move, get extra actions with Eon Chart. There's a few things that she can do where she's really taking advantage of those big numbers as well. Calvin gets nothing. I understand it's not part of the survivor color pie to get extra actions, but I think Calvin needs it to take advantage of his ability. So whether it's some extra action compression, again, there's not much of that in Survivor to begin with. Clue-wise, like Mariner's Compass doesn't really help him because it's only 1 test per round. The old keyring is action compression, but at difficulty 0, which makes his ability pretty much irrelevant. Honestly, there's just not much there to really feed into what Calvin is better at than other investigators. So I think he needs a little bit more of that. It could be something like you get extra actions based on how much damage or horror is on you. I mean, that'd be crazy if it was just 1 for 1, but maybe for every 2 points or 3 points of damage or horror on you, you can take an extra action this turn. Something like that would be really nice. And because at the moment, I think the only way to get extra actions in Survivor is End of the Road, which is good, but what are you doing with that, right? It's only at the end of the scenario. And then Lifeline, I think, if you fail a bunch of actions, you get that many back. And that's not that good either for what I think Calvin wants to do. Because at some point, he's just passing tests, right? He just can pass everything. But it's boring if all you're doing is getting 1 clue or doing 1 damage or 2 damage with a weapon over and over again. You want to do more, and most investigators can't. All right, the next thing what might be really cool is for him to be able to use multiple stats, maybe even at once. So like I said, in order to take advantage of his ability, you want to be able to take a willpower test, an agility test, a combat test. Not necessarily all in the same round. I mean, Trial by Fire level 3 makes you think about using all your stats, but it just doesn't really pan out that way in gameplay in my experience. So like giving him something like the Mystic or Rogue cards that let you add 2 stats together, I think that would be neat, right? Because he could take advantage of that. He could get a pretty big number. However, like maybe he doesn't need that. He's already passing tests. So I think the Survivor card pool needs a little bit more of Succeed by X. Scavenging was that card. Brute Force, Sharp Vision, those are those cards that Calvin takes advantage of probably more than most survivors. Of course, they tabooed Scavenging, so it's a little bit harder for Calvin to take advantage of that. But I think this is an avenue that they need to pursue a little bit more to help Calvin out. Lastly, they need more Spirit traded cards. Didn't mention that he has access to off-class things. So all these things that I said, hey, this isn't really part of the Survivor color pie. Very true. But he can reach into off-class cards to maybe get these things. the Nathaniel Cho Investigator Pack really, really helped Calvin out because it pseudo got him some extra actions with cards like Counterpunch. But then there's just some other cool things that he can take as well. But most of those are all combat oriented, and there's not a whole lot of spirit cards outside of his survivor card access that can help with investigation. Hank Sampson at this point, right, covers the Calvin Spirit, cards for fighting, but not so much for investigating. So Calvin's niche really should be that he can do anything, and it should be that combat and getting clues is something that he can do. But what is he using outside of Survivor to get clues? Here's the card that they really should have made a spirit card from this past expansion, Testing Sprint. This basically covers everything I just talked about. It costs an extra action already to play, but he could potentially take up to 4 or maybe 5 different investigate checks with this one card, which he should be able to pass if he's pumped up his intellect appropriately. That's pretty cool. It's not a spirit though, so he can't take it unless he goes and puts Versatile into his deck and gives him this one card, which is probably not that great of an idea. But this sort of card is really good for Amanda and should be really good for Calvin as well. So I'm sad that they just seem to have forgotten about this guy who again, I think he can do a lot. I've had a really fun time playing with Calvin. The Exploding Goat, the Devil card, is actually really fun in him too. But then you start to look around the table and see that other investigators can do way more. It's a problem with Survivor, right? Survivor and Guardian lose out a little bit compared to the other classes when it comes to those higher XP cards. They do what they say on the tin and not much else. But that's somewhat of a design flaw of the game, I think. But maybe we can see some more higher level Survivor cards that can do more. All right, that is it for my list. There are some honorable mentions, of course. I think Father Mateo's in an okay spot. I wish they printed more for him, but it's hard to figure out what that would be without, boosting Kohaku too much. But a lot of what I said about Jim, I think, can go with Father Mateo as well. More token fishing effects would be helpful. More things that deal with the Elder Sign. Although I think that the mask, the neutral mask, is really good for Father Mateo in a way that it's not for Kohaku. So that's okay. But what else am I missing? Is it Amina that needs some more help? I think the cat mask is really good for her. But if you have any suggestions of ways that you would improve these investigators, again, only through new cards, not through changes to their investigator card or some parallel or taboo, just what are some cards that don't exist yet that would improve their respective card pools? Because I gotta say, with a huge card pool, most investigators can do a really good job at this game. I'll see you next time for another video on my channel. I don't know what that'll be next. Always welcome viewer suggested content down in the comments or elsewhere. And I'll see you next time.